Hello. What I really want to talk about is connections, and not connections you might have thought of necessarily, but various kinds. And I want to start and end with poems. So brace yourselves if you've never listened to poetry readings. I mean, it may not be quite what you expected. You might even like it. Let me see. I do need to have my glasses to see something up here. One of the things is the connection. I was absolutely shaken by Lisa Christine's extraordinary presentation earlier. And one of the connections one needs to question is, what's the relation between poetry and something like that? What's the relation between poetry and what's happening to the earth and what we are doing to every other species of life on earth at this time? What is the relation between our ability to speak, if we can speak, and the imagination and poetry? There are simple answers that people will immediately propose to you, and there are lots of people who say, and I've heard people in high places, I've been told by them, that poets should stay out of politics, as they like to put it. I think, well, I can quite see why you would like that to be so, but that's not a good reason for staying out of politics. It's a temptation. But there was a great French philosopher and activist, Albert Camus, who won the Nobel Prize 45 years ago or so, and died at 48 in a car accident. An amazing man. He said at one point, very simple, those of us who can speak have a responsibility to say something for those of us who can't. And I think that's true of any talent that we have. We don't need to turn into propagandists. That's the real danger, because it ruins the whole thing. You become predictable. But you don't ever turn off the imagination from dealing with those things. And my other great model that I have always in mind is one of the very greatest poets who ever lived was Dante. And Dante never gave up on speaking of the world as it was, and the world and human nature as it is. And that meant speaking about political events of his time too, and great anger. So there is a connection there. I don't think there's ever a formula for these things. And I think that the mistake is to expect there to be some neat formula. And if you're doing it right, you're a good boy. If you're not doing it right, you're messing up. You're being irresponsible. I don't think that's true at all. I think that the more clearly one pays attention to whatever talent one has, and everybody has a talent, the more clearly one pays attention to it, the answer is going to come out of itself. What is the connection between what I perceive, what I have, what I can do, and the world itself? And we're surrounded by people who never want to consider that. Some of them are in high political positions too, as you know. So I want to begin by reading two poems which are a little bit, they're different in kind from each other, but I think you'll see what the connection is. The one is it's a quite recent poem called Convenience. We were not made in its image, but from the beginning we believed in it. Not for the pure appeasement of hunger, but for its availability. It could command our devotion beyond question and without our consent. And by whatever name we have called it, In its name, love has been set aside. Unmeasured time has been devoted to it. Forests have been erased and rivers poisoned, and truth has been relegated for it. Wars have been sanctified by it. We believe that we have a right to it, even though it belongs to no one. We carry a way back to it everywhere. We are sure that it is saving something. We consider it our personal savior. All we have to pay for it is ourselves. The other of these two first poems is, I'll make no explanation for. I think it'll do that itself. It's called A Chain to Her Leg. And I'd like to dedicate the reading to Lisa as a sort of small connection to what she's doing. If we forget Topsy, Topsy remembers. When we forget her mother gunned down in the forest, and forget who killed her, and to whom they sold the tusks, the feet, the good parts, and how they died, and where, and what became of their children, and what happened to the forest, Topsy remembers. When we forget how the wires were fastened on her feet in the name of the experiment the first time, and how she smoldered and shuddered there, with them all watching, but did not die. When we forget the lit cigarette the last laugh gave her, lit end first, as though it were a peanut, for which joke she killed him, we will not see home again. When we forget the circus, the tickets to see her die in the name of progress and Edison and the electric chair, the mushroom cloud will go up over the desert, where the Enola Gay will take off after the chaplain's blessing. The smoke from the Black Mesa's power plants will be visible from the moon. The forests will be gone. The extinctions will accelerate. The polar bears will float farther and farther away and off to the edge of the world. The Topsy remembers. I think you see the connection between those, and then the risk of writing out of anger. The anger about Topsy is something that I probably began in me when I was 6 or 7 years old and learned the story. And it's still the same right there now as I tell you this from the platform. And we forget Topsy. But what Topsy remembers is what we're losing, and we are what Topsy remembers. So I want to make the move to this is not the only possible attitude. We need convenience. We need to have enough money to put food on the table for the family. We need to get to work. We need to live in the world that we live in. And it requires convenience. It does not require the 7 houses that Dick Cheney owns, or some of the money that is that some of the people who are vying for public office now have made over the few years. I don't think we need anything like that amount of money. So if we devote our lives to that, that's convenience. That's what we're talking about. But that's not the only possible attitude. And I want to talk to you about the other side of it. And I want to start by quoting one of the very great scientific minds of the past century, Albert Einstein. And we had mutual friends when I was in the university, because it was the same university. And I was very, very interested in that man, a wonderful man. He said quite late in his life, after all that we know, what is important is the sense of wonder. He said, if we lose the sense of wonder, we've lost all the rest of it. So that's the other side. That's peripheral to the economy, that's peripheral to how you do all of these things that the advertisements are urging you to do. That's not part of that at all. That's something more closely related to the legend when Shakyamuni looked up from under the Bodhi tree and saw the morning star. What did he see? He didn't see a political program, or he didn't see a way of earning $1 million fast. He said, now I see that I and all living creatures are awake together. We're awake at the same time. We share the same moment of waking. That's the basis of that whole thing, and that's the basis of the imagination. I think the imagination is what is valuable about our species. We may not be the smartest species, and we certainly aren't the nicest in a lot of ways, but the imagination, which is there in what he said and what Albert Einstein's talking about, is not about convenience. It's about something far deeper and more wonderful than that. There's to quote Blake again, as Dr. Greenberg ended by doing, Blake in a letter to one of his patrons said, that tree which fills me with tears of joy, to another person is simply a green object that gets in his way. He said, by such a person I will not set my principles, he said. But he said to the man of imagination, the tree is nature, and nature is the imagination. The opposite attitude is to realize that we are here with every single living thing, and if we do what the Book of Genesis says we should do, which is to have dominion over the rest of life, it's a suicidal point of view. The other one is the attitude of imagination. And the attitude of imagination is not just writing poetry or writing anything, but it's the basis of compassion, of language, of being able to say anything, of being able to express anything, of being able to recognize, not recognize in the sense of information, but recognize in the sense of connection. That is, and we have both of those things going on in us all the time, but the economy is all based toward the one, and I want to say, don't ever forget the other, because the other one is what you really are. And so I want to pass to reading two other kinds of poems, short poems. They're both quite recent. First one is a love poem, which they ought to exist. By the way, I started by saying that almost all political poems are bad. Perfectly true. Almost all love poems are bad, but I mean, it's not a reason not to write love poems. Late spring. Coming into the high room again after years, after oceans and shadows of hills and the sounds of lies, after losses and feet on stairs, after looking and mistakes and forgetting, turning there thinking to find no one except those I knew. Finally I saw you, sitting in white, already waiting. You of whom I had heard with my own ears since the beginning, for whom more than once I had opened the door, believing you were not far. That's a poem to my wife, Paula, who's here. And then the last poem And I think I've said enough about the connection between the two kinds of poems in this. This is an even more recent poem. It's one of the last poems in the last published book. It's called Rainlight. All day the stars watch from long ago. My mother said, I am going now. When you are alone, you will be all right. Whether or not you know, you will know. Look at the old house in the dawn rain. All the flowers are forms of water. The sun reminds them through a white cloud, touches the patchwork spread on the hill, the washed colors of the afterlife that lived there long before you were born. See how they wake without a question, even though the whole world is burning. Thank you.